Hello and welcome to We Are the Deluge, a spoiler-free chapter-by-chapter podcast about the climate change novel The Deluge by Stephen Markley. We are your co-hosts, Emily Crandall and John McMahon. Coming to you live from a virtual worldy is Don Schafer and Oleg Burov avatars. Today we are discussing Executive Summary on Election 2032, set in 2032, the third chapter from Ash's point of view, which we are presenting in the form of a report.
That's really funny because the thing I was going to go with was podcasters with persuasively above board objectives, which I feel like actually dovetails really perfectly with our...
Yes, because I was like, why not use this opportunity to indirectly advertise our other podcast projects, respectively.
Oh my God, what a chapter.
What a chapter. Let me hear your summary on this chapter.
Okay, I went with...
Your abstract, if you will.
My abstract, indeed. Our very formal report form. I went with Ash reflects on danger, where it comes from, how it works, and what it means for democratic politics as he confronts the impending election and the question of family.
Ooh, that's really nice. I, as has become my want, went meta on the summary. Here it goes. What follows here, I fear, will be less than helpful and will cover the major events of Ash's chapter of 2032 and the impact of an already anomic American polity on Ash's greatest fears, his relationships, his insistence on the existence of sound science, and his radicalization as this global emergency barrels forward. It concludes with the Clandestine conference, which I beg you must remain ensconced in secrecy as it kind of breaks the novel.
Oh my God. That's impressive.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
I know the Ash describing himself as having become radicalized made me laugh a lot, but I think we'll get into it. Especially
in the context of the rest of that clause, that giant sentence.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So for quite a structural question for us, do we go through the characters of the Clandestine conference in the characters, or when we get into the actual chapter?
I think when we get into the actual chapter.
Okay. Then the only character notes I would add is that Special Agent Chen back.
Yeah.
To everyone's surprise.
I forgot who he was at first, and then I was like, oh, Anthrax.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In what year was that? 2004?
2014?
Yeah.
So here we are, my math is bad, 18 years later. Mm-hmm. And Agent Chen has risen up the ranks and now intersects with Ash, the chapter with whom Tony himself intersects the most.
Right. Yeah. And then ominous foreboding, foreshadowing. Absolutely. And then
we get a tiny bit more of Jane Tufrelio, who I think we've met before.
Ash's mentor, right?
Yeah. And then Alice McCowan, who was Mary Randall's chief of staff or something, and now is disillusioned at the failure of Prira / its transformation into a police state bill.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's sort of a couple big reveals.
Many.
Plot-wise. One is that Ash and Hania's mom has Alzheimer's?
Yeah, a dementia of some form.
Something. The 6 Degrees has coordinated an attack that has killed 2 people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, it seems.
Yeah. And it looks like Victor Love's going to win the election.
It sure does.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying. And Ash correctly understands as terrifying.
Yeah.
Or Agent Chen thinks is more terrifying.
Right. And which is I think a really interesting back and forth between them, which we'll spend some time with.
Absolutely.
But so the way Ash tells it is basically Agent Chen kind of reached out to him.
Yes.
Because of his Agent Chen, it seems to be kind of on his own with the 6 Degrees / the Weatherman investigation, that generally the Bureau or whoever is influencing the Bureau is pointing the direction, the case in really unhelpful directions.
Yes.
But Chen has this suspicion that 6 Degrees is actually not that dangerous, A, but B, they're really rational and kind of science minded. And so thus maybe Ash can provide some insight. I'm is this legal?
Since when has the FBI cared about legality?
I know. But it is interesting.
It is. And it does some of the character tying together work too. So this is how it happens at the bottom of 417. Following the coal plant attacks of 2030, 1930, at the behest of Miss McCowan, I began consulting with the task force pursuing eco-terrorism suspects. I already had a relationship with the FBI ever since they opened a case into the various death threats I've received since Pryor was thrust into the spotlight. This is how I met Special Agent John Chen, a task force leader, and he has sought my perspectives on the motives and thinkings of the so-called weathermen ever since. He feels they follow the science, economics, and politics of carbon pollution closely, and that I might provide insight into their thinking.
Fascinating.
But also, I think maybe we can jump into the body of the report, raises some of the questions that we wanted to think about in terms of Ash's understanding of politics and the broader notion of danger and the various perspectives on it that work its way through this chapter. So you had an insight here I think you should start us off with.
I think that actually that back and forth between them over like actually what is the group or the threat that is the most urgent is really, really revealing, because I think it's both a question of scope and scale, but also a kind of like abstract philosophical question about, and in a kind of like boring, like nitty gritty democratic theory way, but also in this more abstract way, right? Like what democratic tools do we have at our disposal to actually kind of guard against danger, but also what are the sort of dangers to democracy? But like Ash sees what 6 Degrees is up to at like a granular level in a different way from Agent Chen, right? Agent Chen is like, fewer people have died, right, in their attacks in these however many years we've been failing to apprehend anything about them than like this one, incident where the body count is already higher. And like the white supremacists are scarier to Agent Chen because they're unorganized, because they're not savvy, right? And because they have access to guns and like to Ash's point, right, where the weathermen actually seem very consciously to be not trying to kill. They seem to be trying to do something different. Thus, that the danger they pose is of a different order of like urgency. So I was wondering whether you think that Ash is actually kind of sympathetic to 6 Degrees here, even though he's arguing to Chen and sort of agrees, right, with Victor Love's strategy of like naming them as the most important threat.
Yes. Well, it's a partial yes to that question, I think, because Ash is very deeply committed to the root rationality of the movement, right? As he says, this is 419. Their quote, objective seems persuasively above board, trying to raise security and insurance costs for carbon industries to make them unprofitable, end quote. So that's 419. And then that segues into the conversation that you're addressing between this debate between Chen and Ash. And like Ash thinks that it is something about the rationality, the effectiveness, and to go back to the previous Shane chapter, which is an interesting pair with this one, it's specifically the capacity for escalation that Ash fears. This is 421 where he starts talking about that. And, it's not that Ash is obtuse or ignorant of the danger of white supremacists, right? Like his conversation with his mom is all about like, anti-Muslim killings and political parties in India, right? So like Modi or Modi's followers are still in power or something like that in the early 2030s. And, more broadly, his mom is scared of white supremacists here in the US, right? We get also the news in this chapter of this like indiscriminate killing at a baseball game in Chicago, right at Wrigley Field, that kills like 500 people, something more than that. So more than the Las Vegas shooter a couple years ago in our world. And the technology scare there too, right? Is that like there's Jennifer Braden starts a rumor, right, that like the actual Islamic extremist, attack was carried out with smart bullets given to the terrorists by the CIA, right? So, which is like obviously false, but like, or I don't know, maybe not, whatever. But then the smart bullets are used in the Chicago attack, right? Absolutely.
So there's a question there of like, who that is important, right, is like behind the scenes.
Yes, definitely.
of this organization in the kind of institutional sense.
And and Chen, I think, explicitly comments on that at some point. He's like, he says, at times it seems like the FBI is being asked to investigate QAnon rumors more than doing anything else real, right? So he says, at one point they have to track down Kobe Bryant's widow in case she knows something.
Yeah.
That's 419. And it's such a weird reversal of expectations that Markley pulls off here, because one would expect that the FBI government institutional guy would be more concerned about, right, the quote unquote eco-terrorism, as the rest of the novel would also indicate, and on top of our world indicating that. Mm-hmm. And so he does this like doubly interesting twist where he both has Ash recognize their rationality and intentionality. And because of that and the sophistication of what they've been able to do, thus they are more dangerous. Yeah. And so like, I think Ash is very sympathetic throughout this chapter, but this is a place where he's not, and I'm not quite sure why.
Yeah.
And like part of me wonders to go overly psychoanalytical on it, is if there's something about the fact that his mother is so worried about white supremacists that Ash then codes that as a personal rather than political violence,
right? Despite
him commenting on the organized political violence of Hindu supremacy in India, for instance. Right?
Interesting. I think that's an interesting read. I wonder too. So I'm looking at the passage on 421, where he's describing exactly what is both more impressive and troubling about 6 Degrees. Right, a sustained multi-year campaign of clandestine bombings with absolutely zero penetration of its leadership. They've demonstrated not only expertise with explosives, but law enforcement protocol, surveillance techniques, and more importantly, counterintelligence. The fact that neither the FBI lab nor the ATF has been able to understand how they are procuring high explosive material is troubling. Like one read of that is like, Ash is like, I can't figure it out. And so that is the scariest thing.
That's a better reading than my reading.
Well, I think they're complementary, actually. Right. And like, he can figure out why his mom is like worried about Islamophobia and anti-Islamic violence. Right. In part because he thinks he has a clearer read on what, as he says, current events, right? Her ability to understand current events. But he also is constantly demonstrating the limits of his own ability to understand current events, because he's so committed to the idea that you can apprehend political phenomena and social phenomena like rationally.
Yes. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of Ash as a commentator on political events, because he has that clarity and directness, but also the naivete or like being outside of his purview that makes the clarity and directness ineffective when it leads to when it rubs up against certain blind spots or certain things that break out of a pattern that he would otherwise expect.
And he tells you that constantly without telling you that, right?
Yes.
So like, in the beginning, he says, I harbor concern for how often you request input on topics far outside my purview. And
Precisely.
Yet he provides it, right?
Yeah.
And he thinks that he's right.
And he is in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And he is also, because he's one of the characters, maybe the character who most attunes us to international politics, in addition to just domestic politics. Like we have the headline splashes and Ash are the two vectors through which we get the most international politics.
Yeah, he's like, actually, we're super worried about Asia.
And it strikes me that is the least direct, clear, and most chaotic, right? Mechanism for getting news in this novel, and then the most organized, least chaotic, or perceives himself as the least chaotic vector for getting international news. And those are the two places we get it from, which is perhaps indicative of some larger, post-truth nonsense.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting about this conversation with them, right? There's another read, I think, where these two orgs are sort of stand-ins for like an interpretation of some of these like more abstract political questions, right? So like there's also something super meta happening in this back and forth, which is having that conversation isn't actually why Agent Chen called him there.
Correct.
So at the same time, they're going this back and forth, and Chen is setting up like how impossible it is to have a conversation that isn't surveilled, how important it is that the right information get in the right hands and like wink, wink, sort of literally, right, of the right people. That it's all about like this impending threat to like democracy itself, right? And for Chen, it's a question about the police state. And even for Alice McCowan, right, when they're having dinner and she's on her rant, but she's like, it's a problem because he's not actually a Democrat. He's really what we used to call a right-wing Republican. And so like for her, it's still about this like party loyalty, naivete, and about like the legacy of party politics. Yeah. But for Chen, it has nothing to do with party politics and everything to do with like this scary relationship that he has with law enforcement, which we learn a little bit about in the end, and just like one anecdote from his time in the military, which is unsettling.
Extremely unsettling. So
like, you know, this is going to sound really harsh to our friends who do like quantitative political science, but it's sort of like, you know, when the world is burning and somebody's like, well, let's look at this polling data, you know, and that'll give us some clue about like the state of our democracy. And it just feels so unsatisfying because it's this like measure that doesn't actually get at the things that we're worried about.
And so Ash is representative or avatar of that problem,
maybe, or like Mary McCowan, I think, and was kind of doing that for me, right? Her like hyper fixation on kind of like we've misdiagnosed him as a Democrat, and it's like, okay, well, that's not actually the scary thing, right? And Agent Chen kind of gives us another like way to read what's actually scary here vis-a-vis democracy, and it's not about like what happens to the fate of the Democratic Party, right?
Yes, and it's so weird. And I mean, this is Mark Lee writing this or finishing this during the first Trump administration kind of makes perfect sense in this chapter with Chen, because Chen is the one who's like, he is the threat to democracy itself, not he is the threat to the two-party system as we want it to function. Right. And then Mark Lee follows this conversation up with the mass shooting in Chicago that provides a sort of like answer or response both to the disagreement between Chen and Ash, because we find out that it was indeed like white separatists, white supremacists who carried out this attack. But then also we have Victor Love going to give a speech at Wrigley Field in which he does the thing that conservative Democrats often do. In this case, it's take like a white supremacist attack, and he makes it about eco-terrorism, the border, non-white people committing attacks, when it was like white nationalists who made this attack. Yeah. You know, I'm thinking about like the way in which Biden and Harris like bragged about securitizing the border so hard in that sort of thing. And more than that, like Love uses some of Jennifer Braden's language in this speech, like this idea of hunting them, right? Yeah. So for Braden, it's hunt all traitors to extinction, the hate poster that we've now gotten a couple of times. And Love uses that same formulation of hunting them. And I think we're supposed to have our like flags raised that Chen was right, kind of in a double way, because the white supremacist and the threat to democracy comes together in Love's speech. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so in a way, he's like, Ash is demonstrating he lost the argument without ever conceding it.
We've all been there.
Yeah. So true. I don't know what you mean.
What is grad school if not precisely that, over and over and over again?
Wow. Brutal.
Yeah, I know. And Ash, this is the second chapter in a row that ends with the darkest of all the darkest timelines as well. And I think that that's worth considering in relation to the like, what is the fate of democracy versus what is the fate of two-party politics? So like, what is the greatest threat? Because Ash ends the chapter talking about how like they're on the cusp of a new global dark age in which a precious few wealthy people will try to like hoard themselves into some sort of survivable community while actively killing or letting die everybody else. Yeah. And yet for him, it's still 6 degrees that is the greatest threat. And there's something about that juxtaposition where like his political imagination is, I think, so expansive when it comes to, we actually should imagine the worst case of the uninhabitable Earth and what that means concretely. But then it's a failure of political imagination to see white supremacist terrorism, like to pointedly use that phrase, as one of the mechanisms by which we end up at the global dark ages that he fears.
Right. So like a comprehensive governing philosophy is actually scarier to Ash.
Yes. Because of like his valuation of efficacy or something like that.
Right.
Because it's the efficacy of 6 degrees that is concerning for him.
Right. And I think it he sort of forged his own path on the capacity to predict, right?
Yes.
And he can't predict it except like what he can predict, the little he can predict is so, right, the reach is so far that it feels like something of a different order, right, of a project.
Yes. Yeah. And there's another way in which that speaks to this theme we've been concerned about in general, but particularly in the Ash and Tony chapters about the relationship between science and politics, because in the abstract, we get Ash kind of continuing his formulation of like, we need to isolate science as this thing that is purified and removed from politics. He says, in the abstract, I become radicalized in the sense that politics have now infested the government scientific agencies so thoroughly that we must essentially advocate for the continued existence of sound science, i.e. no politics involved, and the policy it demands as the global emergency barrels forward. But then we get what I think is one of the many theses statements of the novel in 435 when they're in their meeting. And Tony, i.e. Ned Stark, and Ash, i.e. Shane Battier, are arguing about precisely this issue. And Tony has gotten to the science is not enough earlier than Ash has. And that's something that we've discussed from the very first episode, and the way that you kind of read Tony is like a little bit doing some STS. So the disagreement between Tony and Ash is, you of all people, Ash, you of all goddamn people, you look right at the models, right at them. How can you turn your back on this? I nodded to the assembled. They're fanaticists. Sure they are, but fantasticists, yes.
Yeah. Which is also interesting.
That is interesting that I read it wrong. That's an interesting slip. Okay. And then Tony says, sure they are, but people like you and me, we've been sorely lacking in imagination for a long time. And I think that's Mark Lee's why do we need climate fiction thesis statement? Why is science perhaps always politicized or always imaginative, et cetera, et cetera?
But then read the last sentence of the chapter. Civilization's abrupt retreat will be marked the world over by every flavor of warring chief in crisp, elegantly tailored suits murdering to obtain power in the hope that they might rule this barbaric and alien age.
Yeah.
Like,
Victor Love, but also fantasticism.
Yeah.
And I think one way to read Ash over the course of the novel is moving from a strict, there is science and then there is everything else, and that everything else includes politics and imagination and fantasticism, to use this maybe made up word from Markley, to a place that is, if not willing to mix them, willing to toggle between them in ways that we might read as a sort of like imbrication or intermingling.
Yeah.
Even if Ash is trying to keep them compartmentalized.
Right. And like, even if he always is undermining the line, right?
Yes. Which is, there's something very human about that, right? We're always failing to maintain the sharp boundaries we put along things when we try to do things in reality.
I also think the decrying of like science as not sound is super interesting.
Yes.
Like, and then he does the same blend, right? He says sound science, sound policy, right?
Yeah.
And so like is policy science or is policy politics?
Great question. We're in a discipline that very question is, and the dichotomy between them is the problem of the name of the discipline.
Yeah. I was also thinking about, I lost the train of thought. I have something about sound there doing a lot of work that was funny to me, but Oh, that's what is radical is a really interesting read too, right? Like,
Yes.
I'm wondering if Markley was predicting something like Doge, right? Like,
it's a great point.
Whenever we talk to him, add it to the list.
Yep.
Because like then it would be radical to think that like policy should be informed by like research conducted by experts in their field. Seems from the perspective of like a kind of 20th century technocratic democracy, like not radical at all, right?
Yes. I was having this very discussion with people on campus last week, 2 weeks ago, because we're doing academic strategic planning. And I was like, okay, it's fine if you want to go do like career-y type stuff. But actually, what's happening in our country right now is an example of why you actually need people to value the social sciences, humanities, arts, right? Because otherwise, it's just, we'll just cut this money. Who cares what happens as a result?
Or even worse, like just media literacy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Which I also think Ash is winking at here too, right? Like that's a little bit of his critique of his mom. But also I think
definitely
that little exchange where she's like really worried about the pastor and like what he's gonna do to Muslim people.
Yes.
And he interprets this as like her misunderstanding, right? She thinks he's running for president. Yeah. And I'm like, but what if she's saying something different? So Ash doesn't understand, right? Like what it is that she's trying to say. And he reads it as her not understanding what she's watching, right?
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
But Ash is so prescient at other places, and this is one of the things that makes him such a wonderful character. You know, and even the language he uses, I think, quite beautiful in its tragedy at some points. Yeah. Like I didn't write down the page number and I apologize, but he has this turn of phrase of the government, quote, elasticizing the habeas writ.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. As we have, secretaries, Homeland Secretaries, Nome being like, oh, habeas corpus is when the executive gets to decide to do whatever it wants, or like literal fights between the Trump administration and the courts about like, what the habeas writ actually means and actually does. And there's a way in which on that particular point, there's this recursivity that happens between the post 9/11 world, as we've talked about in relationship to this novel before, the world in which Markley is writing, the world in which you and I are podcasting, and the 2032 that is being written about in our multiple temporalities, they're all folding back into themselves with something like that. So I'm thinking about that is one like area where Ash has this prescience and also a certain kind of like love of beauty or language in the way he's describing that. But I'm also then thinking about 428, which is a giant reality check. The years of the COVID-19 pandemic, economic decline, increasing inequality, news of the plutocratic class gorging itself on the commonweal, what a phrase, widespread addiction, extreme weather events, and psychological despair have, I fear, primed the body politic to accept radical interventions. L. Victor Love, I fear, may prove the lesser evil as figures like Jennifer Braden become increasingly attractive candidates to a lost and desperate citizenry.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Terrifying and correct.
Is his fight with Seth terrifying and correct?
Oh yeah, that hits hard. Well, I was going to say too, I think there's something about the question of family that's really difficult for Ash, and maybe it gets at what you were talking about earlier, right? That he perceives family as sort of like only about these like, affective ties and like as having no kind of rational basis, but he can't figure it out, right? In so many ways. And yet he is like really loyal to his family, right? He's describing his sister's face and like talking about how hers is always like the hardest social cues to read. And she's like beautiful and she's cold and like, he can't figure out like really can't figure his mom out at all, right? And he's like, he has that devastating line that she was going to forget him before she forgave him, right? Because he finally tells her about Seth. And then Seth is like, hey, by the way, I met a surrogate for us. Let's have a baby.
Yeah.
And Ash is like, why would we do that with everything you know about climate change, right? And so this is their like fight that immediately follows on the heels of Ash telling us about the back and forth with Agent Chen.
Yes.
And basically, like, my perception of this fight is that Ash is being he thinks of himself as being rational, but Seth is reading him as being cold, right? And as like using reason as an excuse for the things he's afraid of. And Ash says, yeah, but not in the way that you think. Like, and for Ash, it can't make sense, right? He's like, the only thing you care about is climate change. Like you make it make sense to me. And then the reasons that Seth gives him are reasons that Ash doesn't find convincing, right? What's the one really, really mean, like savage thing he says to Seth? Do you remember?
And spare me the speech about the singular joy of becoming a parent. Hanaya and Peter expressed sentiments just as boring after they had more. So I beg you not to be as uninteresting as them.
And then at the end of the fight, right, 426, Seth is like, this is why we need to do this. We can't control anything. We could bring a sliver of kindness, blah, blah, blah. And then Ash says, Seth, you can reconfigure an ignorant bromide all you want, but an ignorant bromide, it will remain.
Show me the lie.
He's not wrong. I actually think that Seth made a tactical error in this argument, but Ash also concedes at the end that probably Seth's going to get his way.
Yeah.
But like, I think what Seth should have done is be like, I already know all the reasons, and my reason for wanting to is not a rational one. Mm-hmm. And I still want to, right?
That would speak to Ash's self-perception as he wants to expand, even though he's already doing it, but in a way that's obscure to him.
Yeah.
That he wants to self-consciously and intentionally expand beyond rational argumentation. Yes.
Right. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just do that?
It's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, he'll get there anyway. I mean, though also I'm like, as a person who thinks about this question a lot, personally, that's like the only, right? It's like when you are a certain level of like critic of capitalism, like when you start thinking about all of your consumption patterns, like at some point, if you eat meat, right, you just have to say like, I know all the reasons I shouldn't, and I'm making an irrational choice, right? Yeah. Like that's how I feel about this conversation.
Yeah. And the argument that Seth gives at the end, the ignorant bromide, is, I think, speaks directly to, and, you know, part of me wonders, I don't know anything about Mark Lee's personal life or family life, but like if it makes me think about the way in which he's had these thoughts or these conversations either with himself or with another person. Mm-hmm. And there's something about Seth's defense at the end that I think is also a tactical error along similar lines, because he should have said, I recognize it's irrational. And in fact, like, we're going to do this as an act of defiance or something like that like we're going to defy the fucked up world in front of us in a way that's different than appealing to like the sliver of kindness argument that he does.
Totally.
And to then frame that as irrational in the way that you identify.
Right. Like Ash has just said he's radicalized, right? Like pull
Let's
on
go.
that. Yeah.
Let's go. Yeah.
Oh my God. Should we get to the clandestine meeting?
Oh, we have to get to the clandestine meeting. I think we're gonna do this as cultural artifacts. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's run through the characters. All of them at the clandestine VR meeting. Okay, there's a spoiler question here. So technically, on the strictest reading of what a spoiler is, some of these may be quasi-spoilers, but all of the information that is needed to know who these people is in parts of the novel we have already discussed.
Right.
So we're just going to connect the dots here because all the dots are there and the lines have been hinted at. Okay.
Yes, great.
So obviously Ash is Shane Battier, right, from the NBA. Tony is Ned Stark from Game of Thrones. Kate,
which is so hilarious.
It's incredible. Kate is Donald Duck Trump with oversized swollen balls. Mm-hmm. Ellen Ripley from Alien, Matt, Aaron Brockovich from Aaron Brockovich, Liza, Mr. Blonde from Reservoir Dogs, Tom, also perfect, and Henny, the slapdish comedian, Seth, which is, I think, the most discordant character in Avatar.
Yeah, super weird.
So I think we'll get into the meeting itself, but I think our cultural object is we each had to pick something from the clandestine meeting to connect to this chapter, if I understood the assignment correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, go for it, Emily.
Okay, I went with Alien.
Perfect. I did not go with Alien.
Okay,
so
I thought maybe you would. Okay, so first of all, my cat Ripley is named after Sigourney Weaver's character, right, in the film. One of the characters in the film is named Ash, which is just kind of funny. funny aside.
It's been a very long time since I saw Alien, which is one
Me
of the
too.
reasons I did not go with it.
I had to look up some stuff and some commentary like from now, but basically, right, like the premise is it's like a company ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're asleep and they wake up in the middle of the flight and they have to like respond to the emergency. But the sort of like it's an alien that like roots in, you know, people and then kind of like infects them from the inside, right? So there are like metaphors of reproduction here, right? The like horror of being taken over by an invasive, you know, alien parasitic species, much like I'm told pregnancy. The question of like, should we have a child, right? What is the relationship of that parasitic entity to the like crumbling world that it is being, you know, brought
I hope
into?
that this specific point is setting us up for like an Iris Marion Young or Simone de Beauvoir theory from you, but we'll get there.
Oh, it is not, but maybe I could pivot. That's really good. But also the kind of controversy or the what do you call it? The reveal, right, is that the company knows that the alien is on here, right? So it's in a way a critique of like capitalism too, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and the tagline is, in space, no one can hear you scream, right? So there's something like about, right, like no one can hear the workers, right, is kind of like the allegory there, and the sort of like canary in the coal mine for how doomed we all are, basically, right? And I think that it's interesting that Matt is Ellen Ripley.
Yes.
Especially because Matt like has never had a job that wasn't like provided for him by his like
by someone else,
ambitious girlfriend, his dad at the golf course, or like insert whatever connection like upper middle class white people from North Carolina have, right?
Yeah. the Ratliff family, you know.
Yeah. But also like it's interesting. She is a kind of interesting character because she's like not very feminine, right? But like, you know, Sigourney Weaver is like a classically hot, right, like famous actress. And there's a lot of like discourse around her character when the movie was released, right, in terms of like the feminism of it, right? What does it mean to have kind of like a woman in charge? But also if we're pulling on this like metaphor of parasitism, like, you know, it sort of has to be, right? Is she tropey? Is she doing some interesting work there?
Yeah.
And I could see like this is like, is it Matt's take on like feminist reading of Alien 101 or is he actually
girl bossing?
Yeah. Or is he actually like thinking about, right, this, and we actually don't know what is being proposed, right, in this meeting.
Correct. Yes.
So there's some secret mission that a lot of them are feeling real queasy about and ultimately kind of say no to, but Ash hints at the end they will probably all say yes eventually, right?
Yes.
But we don't know what it is, right? But like
I love that so much.
It's so good. But also, and I think this gets back to actually the debate between Ash and Chen about like the levels and layers of like what kind of problem it is that we're dealing with here, right? Like climate change is not just like the ocean is rising, right?
Correct.
And Ash gets to this point at the end. Climate change is also extreme political unrest and violence and wealthy people getting really, really dirty wealthy, right?
Yep.
So like there is a read of Matt doing this that is like, I'm seeing the bigger picture, right? Like I'm like...
Something tells me neither of us are inclined to give Matt that benefit of the doubt.
No, but I think he wants to.
Yes,
like there's like something deeply like silly and like virtue signally about choosing her as his avatar. Absolutely. But it's also really, he doesn't know how good it is that she stands in for like a position that he would want to theoretically hold, like vis-a-vis everyone else, right? Like Matt wants to be the most like virtuous, right?
Yes.
Like he doesn't care about being right in the way that like, you know, some of the others do, like Tony or Ash or whatever. But he wants to be like the good one, the best one. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And like
whether
he
that's
wants
to
have the
Kate
best cake.
or
He wants to be like a good guy. You know, he wants to be perceived as like a good guy. I'm a good guy.
He wants the ally cookie.
Yeah.
And like, whomst among us?
And I think Alien is such a good choice to like play on his both like naivete, his earnestness, and like where he missteps a little bit, right? And that Alien is actually a savvier choice than he realizes is my take.
That's the correct take. I think it's also worth noting that the other time we've heard about Matt's relationship to the movie Alien is through his friendship with Coral.
Yes.
Back in the FBF days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which speaks to, I think, some of the like Sigourney Weaver as like being slightly more butch or slightly more androgynous in the movie, right? You know, Coral's non-binary, although we don't quite know what they look like.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about that there. And there's also future plot stuff between Matt and Coral that we are not going to talk about.
I don't even remember that. So that's great.
Okay.
I also think to reference a really famous science fiction novel in a novel that is sometimes a science film in a novel that is sometimes a science fiction novel, but that also is about like interrogating the edge between science and fiction, right, is like very clever. And that this is like a kind of like paradigm shifting, you know, like sci-fi film, right? That it's like it's science fiction, but it like definitely takes place like in our world, right? So to think about all the levels of world that we're interrogating with this novel, I think Alien is also doing that, right? It's like it's space. We don't have this technology yet, but it's like squarely in the world where we are. Like capitalism is developing at this way, and we are going to be doing this, right, at some point in the future.
As someone who has been doing work on space billionaires, yes. Yeah. I would thoroughly agree with that reading.
So I think that that's also a very clever kind of wink from Markley there.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, it's also just like so millennial coded again.
Absolutely.
That's my take.
Okay, I'm going to go with actually pulling on Tony's dad-coded Ned Stark avatar.
I knew it.
And spin it out into a kind of broader discussion of Ash and then eventually this novel in terms of the Song of Ice and Fire series.
Amazing.
And like because Tony chooses Ned Stark, which I think is probably the wrong character for him, although we might get into that as the parallel. I was trying to think about like who.
Okay, but he's doing the Matt thing where he wants to be Ned Stark.
He wants to be
and
honorable
but he's really
a father of daughters, et cetera, et cetera. Definitely dad coded, right? Girl dad coded even more specifically. And I was like, so who is Ash's Song of Ice and Fire avatar? And the best I could come up with is Samuel Tarly. And I say this for a couple of reasons, like both bookish people who are misunderstood specifically by their family members, perhaps more specifically by their dads, who through their bookishness have some insight, but always partial or always already partial insight into what is necessary in order to respond to the existential threat to the order of the world that they know, right? Wow. And so like, okay, so Martin has said that The Song of Ice and Fire is not about climate change, like the others are not climate change, but I still think the analogy kind of works. And it's like Samuel Tarly, A, like actually killed one of them, right, when he's north above the wall. And B, it's like through his research that he maybe will, whether it's at the wall or at the Citadel, where he might figure out, and I'm saying this as a book reader who gave up on the show midway through because I'm obnoxious, and is maybe going to like gain some knowledge of the Citadel about how to defeat the others.
Yeah, and, as Halberstam would say, that reading is available.
Yes, absolutely. That is, failure all the way. Perhaps more in Ash's world than Samuel Tarly's. And then Ash is like through his predictive models, through his read of the science, through his read of the economics, through his read of the modeling and the methodology, is like trying to use that as the mechanism by which humanity can respond to the global emergency, right, that it faces. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of like as far as I got with the parallels between the two.
I have another. I
Please.
think there's this one really interesting passage in this chapter where Ash like takes a moment to reflect on actually how little of the world he's seen. And I'm not as familiar with Game of Thrones as you are, but I feel like that's a little bit of, there's some of that in Sam, right? Like he is not as like adventurous as many of the other people, and a lot of the people in the world of the novels and the show, right, like spend basically all their time kind of like traveling, right? They sort of like live on the road, and he has like historically not done that, but is sort of maybe like challenging himself to kind of step outside like
Ooh, these are two very
patterns.
great points because like Sam will at one point reflect on, in the novels at least, how much of the world he ends up seeing, perhaps despite his interests. And you're, I think, precisely right. And this works very well with Ash, the self-consciously pushing beyond one's norm or one's boundaries, but then also constantly being pushed, A, by other people and or B, by circumstances to do the same, including emergency circumstances.
That's great.
I don't think we're supposed to read Sam Tarley, either book or show, as autistic or neurodiverse. So I think that's doesn't quite work. Now, this then spun me out into, okay, well, we have to at least do all of the other POV characters because we're millennials and this is a podcast. Okay, so Ash is Samuel Tarley, I think. Tony claims Ned Stark. I'll ask some questions about that. This is like from, I think, most obvious to those that I struggled with the most. Jackie is like 100,000% Sansa Stark. Yes?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Matt is the charitably Bran or uncharitably Rickon.
Oh my God, amazing.
Right?
He's both. Yeah.
He's both. Yeah. Keeper, I had trouble with, but I ended up going with Jaime Lannister because like one of the questions of the Jaime Lannister character, perhaps a little more so in the books than in the parts of the show that I've seen, is can somebody who has done all of this heinous shit be morally redeemed?
Yeah. I was going to say the Hound.
Oh, that's a much better option. Yeah, let's go with that.
They both, I mean, it's the same question for both of them, I think. But one's like a foot soldier who's like, basically doesn't have much in the world, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll stop talking for cryptic foreshadowing reasons. Shane, I went with Arya Stark, but I think there's some other possibilities. And I'm sticking with mostly major-ish characters.
Well, that works too, because we've been reading Jackie and Shane as like parallel, right? They're about the same age. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. And then I went with Kate because she's arguably the main character of the novel. And I didn't come up with a great answer for her. Like the obvious one is Daenerys, but I don't think that works.
What about Cersei?
I thought about that too. Part of it is like, we're not going to dive into Daenerys Targaryen discourse, but like how one reads what I understand to be the turns that Daenerys takes during the end of the show version. But yeah, I considered Cersei as well. And I didn't like, if we want to get into more minor characters, and my understanding is that this character didn't really get much to do in the show, but in the books, Arianne Martell, but like, she's not she doesn't have like main character syndrome enough.
Yeah. So. Yeah, because I feel like Kate, right? Like Kate has her own moral compass, but it doesn't always line up to like abstract moral principles or is necessarily even always consistent, right?
Yes. I think part of my Kate is Daenerys is also anticipating and looking ahead to future Kate things to happen.
Yes. Okay. Fair. Well, we better.
That as well.
That's excellent. I love that.
So that's as far as I got, and that's perhaps too far.
I mean, yeah, but I think that this hesitation on net, but also now this is funny because we've done this both with Matt and with Tony, right? Like that they want to be, right? He wants to be Ned Stark. And Matt wants to be like earnestly getting Ellen Ripley right? And we know he's not. Yeah.
And I think Tony is instead either Stannis or Davos. I'm not sure which, but he's one of those two, is I think the more apt comparison.
So good.
Yeah. A couple cultural objects referenced in this chapter. Twister, the movie, of course, by Peter.
Okay, but so funny because also since this book came out, there has been a remake of Twister.
Twisters, I didn't see it. Did you see the?
Yeah, I did. It was really fun. I mean, and like, it's also interesting because the joke that he makes is hilarious. It's like, do you have what page it's on?
It's 413. Fuck me. Where's Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt when you need them?
But like the people who starred in the remake are Glenn Powell, who's like, in everything, a handsome American, neutral, could be a racist cowboy, could be like a coastal elite, and Helen and Daisy Edgar Jones, who's not even American, right?
Yeah.
She's English, but which is very funny. But she's also like so hot right now, like
definitely
Zoolander Hansel situation.
There's a Jim Jones Kool-Aid reference, which I think has to be mentioned as a cultural artifact. It's 431 is the page. They're all arguing about it. And I feel like there was a Kool-Aid. Maybe I wrote the page down. Oh, this is Kate. That's fair. Let's do it like this then. I'll explain what we're up to, then we can decide if we're all mad cultists about to drink poison together.
Wow.
I would also suggest, and this might be because I just saw the last Mission Impossible movie.
Oh my God.
The beginning of the chapter, the destroy the document after reading, we should read. The reading is available as if that's a Mission Impossible joke.
It is. Yeah.
This chapter will self-destruct in 10 seconds. Yeah.
Did you see it in IMAX?
No. IMAX not super prevalent in the
that makes sense,
greater North Country.
Oh my God, so good. Okay, what else needs to go in the body of our report here?
I think we should talk a little bit about some of the form stuff we've already gotten into. And, I framed this chapter to my students as a chapter that kind of breaks the novel. Mm-hmm. It comes almost exactly halfway, not quite halfway, particularly if we are thinking about the clandestine meeting. Mm-hmm. But that the clandestine meeting itself is a form of this collapsing in on itself sort of chapter. And because this is the place where all of these characters, several of whom have somewhat interacted with one another or knew of one another, but hadn't interacted or interacted in different combinations and forums and all of that kind of stuff, come together, but in this very strange world as all of these people. Mm-hmm. And that so there's something about the form of all the characters coming together for some unforeseen thing that's happening in the future, maybe, is I think notable. But then
also so there's the explicit characters, right, who are actually in a meeting together virtually. Yes. But then there's all of the peripheral characters that are on the periphery of this chapter too.
Yes.
But the pastor is everywhere in this chapter, mm-hmm. which evokes Jackie a bit, right?
Yes.
And also even Keeper's in the background of this chapter, right? We know mm-hmm. he gets caught up in the investigation, but also in the investigation of 6 degrees. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then again, the Midwest kind of looms big here.
Absolutely. But, yeah. So there's that. And then there's the broader fact that this chapter is in a secret report to an increasingly important character in the novel, Tracy Amonzaihow, as a political figure. But it is to be destroyed after reading, and is kind of self-avowedly an overly expansive back channel into places that the character as avatar of part of the novel isn't supposed to go. And so there's the way in which this formally shouldn't work.
Yeah.
This chapter, it just straightforwardly should not work. And Mark Lee is very, I think, adeptly using the structure of the meeting, of the Ash writing the report, of the report going to Amonzaihow, of it having to be destroyed, mm-hmm. as a little bit of a tell into what it means to write to an audience and having control over what gets revealed and when, mm-hmm. right? So the device of this being written to Amonzaihow, and then more specifically, the device of Ash leaving an obfuscation of what's actually being discussed. This happens on 432 and 435 to 436 as a way not only to keep Amonzaihow out of the details, but also that's the method by which we as the reader don't get to find out what's actually going to happen. Mm-hmm. We get these peripheral clues. It's more than a stunt. It's fucking insane. It's not something Tony would let his daughter do. It's risky. They would all be up for lots of prison time. It requires a chimerical app that functions kind of like Grindr, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
And so there's just all these ways in which like what is revealed and what is being obfuscated is formally a part of this chapter.
Well,
that
also, it involves the pop singer as a dead someone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Love that. So I don't have much like a lot of my comments on form of the Deluge. I don't have a great point about all of this, but just to be like, how does Markley conceive of this? And B, there's this, what does the form of the novel tell us about the novel itself? Like much like the disagreement between Tony and Ash is about why you might need climate fiction, right? Yeah. This function of this aspect or dimension of the chapter is about what the process of writing a novel in which there is secrecy, espionage, et cetera, is like, and how much manipulation is required.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the characters as maybe like avatars of, I don't know, like us or something. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, it, and the not reveal is, I think, what makes that work. Right. Cause I think you're right that it is asking a lot of one chapter to kind of carry the weight of like, almost as like you can read it as a sort of jokey, like cut me some slack here. Right. Or you can read it as like a really earnest, like, defense for, right, like the project.
I think it's much more the latter, right?
Yeah. And I think like I'm not telling you yet what you're here for is a fun wink at that. Yeah.
And I can, moreover, formally, I think it's amusing that we get Ash to comment on all of the other characters, on like who they are as people. There's the pastor stuff, which I think was really important. And Ash's commentary on the pastor taps into what we've been talking about with like Markley's obsession about kind of identity politics and cancel culture. Yeah. Right? Because Ash identifies as the turn that the pastor makes is that he lost a lot of parts to actors of color. Yeah. And then he made shittier and shittier films that were ridiculed. So he chose a different kind of performance. But as Ash points out, and there's something that's parallel to his diagnosis of 6 degrees, that Ash identifies the pastor as, quote, tapping into real emotions of frustration and disillusionment, end quote, even though it's a con or even though it's a performance, which I think is telling. But then there's like the whole virtual meeting itself, right? So that Ash and Matt were collegial, if not friends. Spoiler alert, they're actually friends. And I think Matt would use the word friends to describe him and Ash. He has nothing really much to say about Kate positive. Like, she doesn't have scientific background. She doesn't have legislative insight. She has only, quote, her own peculiar and mutinous logic, end quote. Good for her. Yeah. Tom is distasteful, but direct.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Right. Which coming from Ash is like, that's a really funny, like, complisult.
Perfect.
Yeah. And and maybe this kind of takes us into the question of like Markley writing an autistic character too. But I think it's interesting. Like, we're supposed to read his descriptions of them as neutral, right? Observations, in part because like that's how his brain works. Right. But I think that we've also been posing the question of like, you know, the limits of his perception of his own neutrality, right? Is obviously his observations are inflected with all the things that he values, but he doesn't think of those as values. He thinks of those as reasoned views.
Yes.
Rather than values. Yeah.
If we weren't doing our cultural object tied to this chapter, I think mine might have been The Rehearsal. Are you a Rehearsal watcher?
I haven't watched it. I have a really hard time with what's his name, Nathan Fielder stuff. It's like very, very uncomfortable for me.
Extremely so. So the second season, I'm not going to spoil too much, but just say like the question of Fielder's own potential autism.
Oh, interesting.
That is tied into the form of the creative thing itself is one of the central themes of season 2 of The Rehearsal.
Interesting.
And there's a certain way in which like Fielder using the show to explore that about himself, maybe, because there's obviously this question of like how real is anything that's happening in The Rehearsal, raises some parallel like formal questions about what does it mean to, in this case, write a character who is autistic.
Right. Because it's like, in some ways, it lets you do something like reflect on the questions that Ash raises that are actually about like the human condition, but that he doesn't perceive as being about those. Right.
Yes, precisely.
And that like gap between our perception of what we're perceiving and the thing we're perceiving, which is like, again, the meta shit of this book. Right. But I'm still reading it sympathetically, I think.
Me too. Definitely.
The effort. Yeah.
And I think the fact that Ash is commenting on that sometimes more directly than others in the story itself helps build that orientation to it. And also that, you know, we've had him talk about how he is trying to play with metaphor, right? Or something like that is this goal he has made for himself. And then the amount of lyricism or amount of abstraction that takes place in this chapter is, I think, an accomplishment for Ash's success in that endeavor. Like I'm thinking about the discussion of the mauve dread at the end. I'm thinking about this idea of like the human lives behind the integer, which is him very explicitly trying to like deal with his, to think about his relationship with his own neurodivergences, or this like description he has of the drizzle of the rain as I'm trying to find that itself. The outside is the one true world where the drizzle still fell.
Whoa.
And like that sounds like a Matt, right?
Yeah.
Sort of figure of speech.
The conversation he has with with Hanaya and talking about their belief, right? Because she's still religious, but even though she's like political, right? I think that's the read we're supposed to have.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of. You know, and she says, "Did you ever believe?" And he gives her this like, you know,
incredible
borderline diatribe about like the scientific improbability of the thing that they're asking him to believe.
Yeah.
And then she says, "Jesus, you weren't always this literal you weren't this literal when you were 5 or whatever." Right. And it's like,
actually he was, and he's becoming much less literal.
Right. But also, you know, it's a question of which of them has a more accurate memory of their childhood. Right.
Yes.
Which is like a sibling question and like a family history question and who gets to like write the story of our family. Right.
Definitely.
Which is
his two older siblings. We have thoughts on this, I imagine.
And like, I think that's another piece of kind of connective tissue to the question of like the ethics of childbearing or child rearing. Right.
100%.
And like, you know, I also think that's a thread Seth could have pulled on that would have worked for Ash, right? Like, like we have an opportunity to like write our own family here. Like, why it's not rational, but like, you know, what else are we going to do that's like this, right?
That seems correct to me.
Yeah. But I think your insight that like maybe this is a conversation that Markley has really had with somebody is spot on, because also if he was giving good arguments, they wouldn't be having a fight about it. Right? Like,
yes,
is sort of my take.
Yes. Although as you point out, like Ash says at the end that Seth's just going to get his way.
He's going to get his way. Yeah.
And for irrational reasons. And it's because like Seth is hot and is beautiful, right? Is part of it. Not the only reason, but a big part of it.
But oh my God, what's the list of like things he doesn't like about him? Was so funny. Oh, it's on 422. There are many things about Seth I find distasteful. He's a poor cook, though he thinks he's a good one. Ideologically, he is heavily invested in identity claims to one's sexuality and pushes me to attend, quote, pride events, though I find them tasteless, corporatized alcoholic displays. He doesn't rinse food from dishes before placing them in the dishwasher, which usually means some granule will cling on and I'll have to wash them again by hand. When we hike, he prattles too much and too excitedly, which obviates the serenity of the forest.
Amazing. Also, it's June 2nd, so happy Pride Month to Seth and Ash.
So funny. Anything else we need to add to the body of our memo?
I think let's do some theory to move towards the close of it. I went with taking off from another cultural reference from the meeting, the clandestine meeting on the cliff in Ireland in a virtual worldy. And so I would propose that the appropriate theory for this chapter is the book How to Read Donald Duck
I could not remember what that book was called, but I remember we did an episode of this on It's Always Already.
It's one of the final episodes, which is also hilarious to me.
That's really funny. It's me, you, and James, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's by Dorfman and Mandelart. It was first published in 1971. It's like this Chilean Marxist critique of Disney and like the imperial capitalist project of American culture, which like Dorfman and Mandelart like juxtapose against the censorship and book burning of the Pinochet regime and the relationship between the U.S. and Pinochet and their backing of Pinochet, all through an analysis of Donald Duck, the comic strip in particular. And it's
I remember
amazing.
There being like a really close reading of Scrooge McDuck also in particular.
There sure is. There sure is. Duckburg. And it's just, I was reading the episode description for the Always Already episode on this book, and it talks, there's one phrase, let me pull it up. I think this was James inspired, the aspiring burgers of Duckburg and the realms beyond.
Oh my God.
Encapsulates a lot about what
I remember
up to.
Feeling like really sort of confounded reading that book, but then when talking about it, actually finding it like really generative and interesting.
Yes, absolutely. There's apparently some MCU talk out in that episode. Maybe we can link to it in the show notes if I remember. And so anyway, there's this question about capitalism, about ideology, about culture, and the fact that Kate chooses like a grotesque Donald Duck Trump as her avatar recalled to me the conversation we had that tried to like read a little bit of whether Scrooge is an avatar for Trump in the world of, in our world, in the world of how to read Donald Duck, and kind of more broadly the way that Markley is trying to consider what cultural politics means, both because he's writing a climate novel, but also within the world of the novel, there's so much about that. Like a lot of it is about what signifiers of class or of race are appropriate. A lot of it is about, the way that the pastor is this kind of manipulative figure who nonetheless taps into something real, strikes me as a way that we describe Donald Trump quite frequently, and I think not inaccurately. And simultaneously, like I was, then wondering to what extent that might make sense through a like cultural studies, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist reading of Donald Duck himself. So,
amazing.
So I've got How to Read Donald Duck by Dorfman and Mandelart as our theory.
I love that. Okay, I'm gonna pick up on a thread from the Agent Chen and Ash debate where Chen says he's worried about the politicization of the Bureau. And there's something about that like didn't quite sit with me. And then I was like, to say the Bureau, even not the FBI, is to already imply, right, like bureaucratic politics, right? And I wanted to think with David Graeber on this. Okay, so great. I'm thinking The Utopia of Rules on Technology, Stupidity, and the Secret Joys of Bureaucracy.
Amazing.
So, right, like Graeber argues basically that like one of the kind of central laws of liberalism, right, is that any market reform or government initiative intended to reduce red tape and like promote market forces will have the ultimate effect of increasing the number of regulations. So, and this is in terms of like every level, right? The total amount of paperwork, the total number of bureaucrats the government employs, the total number of sort of like hurdles you have to jump through in order to participate, right? Like in the market or whatever. But I think what's really interesting about the kind of like history of the bureaucratic state to me is that like if bureaucracy is about administering the state, then like it doesn't make sense to say that a bureaucratic entity like doesn't have like a political investment, right? So when Chen says the politicization of the bureaucracy, that's not what he means. Like I get what he means, right? He's like, we're being bought and sold and like we're not allowed to actually pursue our mission or like actually protect the things we're supposed to protect because like everybody has at odds perceptions of actually what's at stake and who is in need of protection from who, et cetera, like tap back into the danger conversation we had at the outset. But also, like bureaucracy is something in the US in particular that everybody decries, right? At the same level as we decry like the political elites or right, like the establishment. But it's like, but Graeber really, I think, usefully talks about the US as a kind of paradoxical place where like everybody hates bureaucracy, but nobody wants to do anything about it.
Yes.
And like that is a political question for Graeber. And so like Graeber means something different, right? He's like
definitely
thinking anarchism and thinking about like smaller case direct democracy and like almost the Fierce Blue Flyer kind of like alternative to,
absolutely,
right? Like Democratic Party politics. Yeah. And
self-organized communities.
Yeah.
Opposed. Yeah.
And that like, but there's also this other kind of point, which is that like the market, right? The freedom of the market is facilitated through its management by the state, right? And so like, you know, and this is like something we talk about a lot in terms of like neoliberal policies, in terms of income inequality, blah, 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 like the relationship of the market to the state. But I wonder like how we could reframe Chen's like observation into something that like brings him closer to like Graeber, right? So it's not just, and like, which is maybe paradoxical because he's law enforcement, right? But like, he does seem to be really interested in like he seems to understand his own role to be like protecting people from violence. But again, like as a bureaucratic entity of a state whose, you know, entire like raison d'etre, right, is a monopoly on violence. It's like this question we keep coming back to of like who's allowed to use violence and what kind of violence is justified. And I think that's the real question he has. And maybe like to not frame it that way means to like invite some uneasy reflections on his own role in kind of perpetuating violence, right? So like
I think you answered your own question by going to the like monopoly of violence. It's like we would give Chen Weber, right?
Right.
Like, we can't give him Kathy Ferguson, right?
Yeah.
Feminist critique of bureaucracy. We can't give him the chapters of States of Injury by Wendy Brown, where she talks about bureaucracy in the state.
Yeah.
Right. But we might be able to give him some Weber.
Yeah. And I think that like, I think he needs Graeber too. Like he needs to understand, right? Like his role, his being caught up kind of in that machine. And it just like, it's just a little aside, but it struck me. It just, something didn't hit right there for me. And I was like, what's going on here?
I love the Graeber suggestion because I think it goes in two additional directions, one of which, maybe both of which go back to the novel. But there's obviously like the bullshit jobs Graeber. And I think like it'd be really interesting to force Jackie to read that and then honestly give her thoughts on that book and ask and force her to consider whether she has worked a bullshit job.
But she knows she has. We already know this. So, and that's part of Graeber's argument, right? That like to some degree, people who work in bullshit jobs know that their jobs are bullshit.
It's a great point. But like, would Jackie admit that to herself is, I think, an interesting character study. And then the other is like your particular point about Graeber on bureaucracy and the attempts to eliminate bureaucracy always lead to more bureaucracy is, I think, and I'm sure this has happened and I haven't seen it yet, but like all of this debate around the abundance thing from Klein and Thompson. And like there have been many, I think, solid leftist critiques of that, but it strikes me that there's a particular Graeber critique of bureaucracy inflected critique of abundance.
Yeah. And I think one thing in this book too that Graeber's trying to do is to try to figure out like why the state, like how the state is so durable, even when like in a moment in our time or in our world or in the world of the novel, like the governing philosophies seem to be kind of crumbling around the like minutia of the daily ins and outs of the state, right? But
you've already referenced Doge in this episode,
right. But like the state isn't going anywhere.
No, definitely not.
You know what I mean? So we're like, what's happening? Like in the novel, they're like, oh crap, Victor Love's going to win. What is that going to mean? But like the state's not going anywhere.
Sure isn't. Instead, it's going to be a war criminal, war profiteer. And
right. And then we can go to like James Scott or whatever.
Yeah. Seriously, coming up next from Emily's theory notes on the Deluge.
So that's my proposal that actually Agent Chen is his fears about the politicization of the Bureau are really an existential fear about his own role in perpetuating the violence of the state. But he doesn't have the political theory tools to name that. So
that's what we're here for. That's our raison d'etre.
Oh my gosh.
I think one final tiny theme thing before we end up with comedy is it's worth pointing out that Ash really wants to and is required to report on this meeting, right, to Chen or to Ayman Zayao or to whomever. But he makes the note that because they involved his partner, they ensured he won't betray them, which is Ash's own, here's where I will accept the irrationality in this particular instance.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth pointing out. And also just figuring out where each of the characters ended up in terms of whether they're in on this or not is, I think, just worth clarifying, right? So Tony didn't know the full details, but agrees to it now that he does. Kate and Liza were the architects. Matt storms out. Tom storms out. Seth is like, I'll help however I can.
Right. But really his function there is to ensure Ash's participation, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like a hostage for Ash.
Yeah.
Speaking of Game of Thrones.
I know,
using
right?
personal relationships to compel certain actions.
Wow. We're getting deep.
This is also a very funny chapter, like this entire novel.
I know.
In ways that were really sad.
Yeah. The one time I actually really did guffaw out loud was at Peter's Twister joke, though. That made me laugh so hard.
There were a couple of those instances for me. One is the fact that the meeting with Ned Stark, i.e. Tony, takes place in the pastor's world/worldy.
Yes.
I laugh at every time.
Yeah.
Ashes, this is 426. This kind of meta joke is always going to get me. I apologize if I've traveled afield. I'm told my memos can be convoluted. LOL.
So good.
And then that Ash describes part of Victor Love's appeal as he posed shirtless with his husband in their quote, with their quote, impressive abdominal muscles on display.
Oh my God.
Really funny shit.
Yeah. I think also the opening to the sentence about the membos being convoluted is very funny. Ostensibly, this document began as a measured attempt to extrapolate if you and your supporters should throw your weight behind, which is a funny way. That pulls at odds too,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I felt a little personally attacked by the relatable content of the quote, college-educated, medium to high-income urban professional of an energy and extraction-intensive economy, end quote, who would do things like read the New Yorker articles by Minsa Faruqi and watch documentaries that were actually curated by algorithms.
Yep. Oh yeah. Personally attacked. 100%.
That's what I've got for the comedy.
Yeah, I really liked the description of President Hogan as the Dems' golden goddess, first female feminist idol. But also, that being juxtaposed with this, I think this is the first time we're hearing about her, having a stomach for violence. But to watch the live feed of a guy getting tortured without blinking.
Yes. She's been referred to as the, imperial feminist in chief or whatever by others. And Kate has had some choice words for her and vice versa, but that's a new detail. Yeah.
Gross. But that was a funny description of her. I also thought that Ash's selection of an avatar was hilarious.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Great callback to the first Ash chapter as well.
And he describes him as early NBA analytics hero, which is so cute.
Especially because that's, obviously that's how Ash got started. That's how Peter got started. Yeah. And now their algorithm, their model they made is being used for nefarious purposes.
Yep.
Beyond celebrating semi-obscure NBA players.
Yeah. I forgot that we had some less than sympathetic reveals about Peter.
And more to come, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep.
Cryptic foreshadowing alert and all.
Great. I think that's about, destroy document after reading. Also huge LOL right at the outset. Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
Are we supposed to throw the book away? Right?
Yeah.
There's this question of what does it beg of the reader themselves?
Although mine is starting to look like a pile of garbage because I'm absolutely destroying it on this reread.
Yeah, that's all right. That's why we want our physical objects.
Yes. Shall we conclude with an executive summary title?
Yes, I have executive summary on the Anomic American Polity in Clandestine Conferences.
That's funny. The word clandestine is in mine also. I went with executive summary on how missiles, assault rifles, and VR world clandestine ambush impact the democratic process. A little messy. I think yours is better.
Okay, we can do it.
I tried to hit too many of the layers, and that didn't work.
That's my job usually, to do something overly convoluted.
Wow, what a chapter! What a chapter!
This is the end of book 3.
I can't believe that. I know. Book 4 coming up next, and we don't go too far ahead in the future, right?
No, just a year. So we have Shane 4, titled 6 Degrees is Coming, as if they haven't already been, set in 2033.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on We Are the Deluge.
And we are the Deluge.